Welcome to In the Telling, a podcast that highlights amazing Black family stories from everyday people like you. I'm Miranda.
And I'm Stephen. And together we are the co-founders of the Nomadic Archivists Project, an initiative that partners organizations, institutions, and individuals to establish, preserve, and enhance collections that explore the African Diasporic experience. You see, families are universes unto themselves, and they are complex and complicated. Love stories, rivalries, naming practices, absences, stories about migrations, pain, surprise, and forgiveness.
If we are fortunate, we learn our past from those who lived it, often it's by our own efforts and labors to uncover pieces of truth about our own family history. This is what we will explore in this bi-monthly podcast, people sharing stories about their families and how they came to learn them. So join us as we journey with you on In the Telling. We thought that we would open up this first podcast with just talking a little bit about our own experiences with digging into our genealogy and trying to trace or understand the story of specific individuals from our family.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, Stephen, I'm really interested to hear. I've worked with Stephen for the past 10 years. We both worked at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture for about 7 of those years, and now we have an initiative together. So I know a lot about Stephen. I know a lot about his family and his past, but not, you always think you know a lot about people, but there's always so much more, right? And I know that your relationship with your mother and your mother's history has always been a big part of your life. And I know Stephen has also been working with my mother, who is a genealogist and has been a genealogist for the last 40 years, to sort of continue to dig into his mother's history.
So what's awesome about you asking me about my mother is because I feel like our mothers are connected now, because your mom, who's been a genealogist forever, who found some things out about my mom that I find very interesting in her history. So, but I want to say, I'll start by saying her name is Elaine Ellen Houston. She was born in 1940, and she passed away breast cancer in 1997. As a kid, I was very close to my mother. She had 5 children. I'm number 3. I'm the first boy. And she was just a wonderful person to me. She was very outgoing, thoughtful, creative. And most recently, I met some folks who knew her when she was a young mother, and she was described as the woman on the block who brought everybody together at the house. So she was a gatherer. And I feel like I got that quality from her. I like bringing people together in my home and feeding them and that
is very true for you, Steve.
Very much. I love I love that.
You love a good gathering.
I love a good gathering and I love a good solitude, so I have it both ways. I really like it. But I want to say this about genealogy, is that I started out researching my family's history in my 20s, but it was unknowingly, in a way, because I don't know why I did this, Miranda, but I guess it was because I was taking a lot of literature classes, specifically Black literature, more specifically Black women's literature. And so I was interviewing my mother for a project I was doing at the time that I thought was going to be a book on Black women in Toledo. And so that interview, which went on for about an hour, I basically became an oral history for my mom. I talked about, asked her about where she grew up, her siblings, what was her life like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when she got married, and after that, and the kinds of things she did. And so she was very open and honest, and she talked about raising kids, religion, politics. My mother she was a Democrat, but she was conservative, on the conservative side. And she grew up Lutheran. She went to church with her grandmother, Beulah O'Neill, who's from the South, actually. She's
What
from
was
Georgia.
your grandmother's name? Oh,
Beulah O'Neill.
Beulah.
Beulah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've seen two pictures of Beulah, and they both she has this austere look on her face. They're both black and white pictures. The first picture, she's actually in my mother's and father's wedding, my parents' wedding picture, standing in the back with her purse, looking very serious. Another picture I saw her with two unidentified people, but I've always loved her, and I have a picture of her on my altar. And so um, my mother was born in Toledo. She died in Toledo. And around 1989, when I was 23, I was doing research for the book. She sat in what was my second apartment in Toledo. I was going to undergrad school at the University of Toledo. And I was talking with her about her life. And again, my mother was really outgoing. She divorced my father in 1986, but she left him in 85. And so she was always someone looking for something creative to do with her life. Wonderful reader, wonderful thinker, loved Stephen King. And I remember watching my mother read these little, go from horror to romance books. So there are these pink and lilac books in the house, stacks of them. I was like, my mother was a voracious reader.
Did you ever read with your mom?
No, but we both liked Langston Hughes. We both liked James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. So I like that part of it. But she always encouraged me to read and write. And she was very supportive of any idea I had, basically, to take, Mom, I'm going to be a singer. I'm going to do this, whatever. Well, it turns out that I'm not a singer, but she was supportive anyway. And so one of the things I discovered about my mother was that she went to school, and she attended Libby High School, which is on the south side of Toledo, which is not very far from our childhood home, and not very far from where she grew up on Avondale in Toledo, Ohio. So my mother went to school from 1955 to 1959. And so the weird thing is that that's 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 1955, she was a freshman. 1956,
but she started out young.
Sophomore.
She was 15 when she started in college.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because she was born December 28th, 1940. Yeah, 1940. So she started around that time, but in 1957, there is no record of her attending Libby or any school. And it's something that I do when I go back to Toledo, is to look for any traces of my mother in 1957. And a great deal of her relatives and people who knew her have passed away. So no one can really tell me what happened around that time.
Okay.
But then the following year, 1958, she's a junior in high school. And then she graduates in 1959. And in January 1961, she actually marries my father, who was originally from Louisiana and Arkansas, and he actually came to Toledo to stay with relatives before heading out to California. He met my mom and decided to marry her. They decided to get married and they stayed in Toledo. But I'm still thinking about what happened in 1957, and I'm determined to find out by just trying to find people.
Yeah. So what have you? So right now, that's a missing year. So,
Yes.
And so what have you done? Have you looked into? What are your thoughts first? Where was she? Where do you think she was during that time period?
Oh, I have some thoughts. I have some theories. One theory I have is that she might have gotten ill and maybe stayed out that year for some reason.
Okay.
Another thought is that she might have gotten pregnant.
Who would she have stayed with if she was ill?
That's a very good question, because I don't know a lot about my mother's family, because a lot of them came south. Her father, her grandfather, these people came from the South, Tennessee, as a matter of fact. So you've heard the story that a young girl from the North would get pregnant and then be sent down south.
Right.
Right. So that's still in my head. In fact, I'm actually about to reach out to one of her cousins who's 84 years old and still living in Toledo, who is active in city council, who may be able to help me find out more. I think my thoughts around it are, other than just what might have happened, is that it may be hard to penetrate that whomever has that knowledge, it may be just, oh, you don't need to know that. That's none of your business, kind of thing. And so I'm worried that people who may have that knowledge, I've talked to one of her cousins before, and she goes, she wasn't old enough to know, right? If anything happened, she wasn't my mom's age. And then there are other people who are just like, like her younger sister, she doesn't know either. And so I'm just trying to be patient, and I've done some research. Other than the yearbooks, I'm simply just trying to track my mother through other means, which is kind of hard. As a young Black woman in Toledo, Ohio, what kind of records exist for that? So school's one, obviously.
Yeah.
But unless she was in the paper for some reason, she wouldn't come up in the paper, which is unfortunately not indexed at this point.
Well, if she was ill and she was still in Ohio, then there may be records of her going to the hospital.
So there are a few hospitals in Toledo, and one of them is Riverside, where I was born in 1966. And so that's one of the, I'm trying to track down any medical records from that time. And it's kind of hard because even though there are some stipulations on some medical records, and I haven't gotten into it that well, but I remember working as an archivist that some medical records were sealed and they were not available to anyone.
Right. This is true.
They would be destroyed. Yeah. And so it's a mixed bag. I've actually seen some medical records open to some people, but you have to get consent. They're almost similar to school records, right? You have to get consent for them. And so.
Well, I know you've also done DNA testing, right?
I've done DNA testing with my dad and myself, yes.
Yes. And so if you did have a sibling out there, a half sibling, and they took a DNA test, you might come up with a match that way. But that
would be awesome.
Right. And
that would be awesome.
But that would obviously require that person to be interested in something like that. And that's hard to predict.
Absolutely. So I'm on Ancestry.com right now, but I'm also about to do 23andMe soon. So yeah, I'm really excited about that prospect.
And so what about your father, though? I mean, he's somebody that I would think who married her just a couple of years after this missing year, that he would have intimate knowledge of what happened during that time period.
That's a very good question. My dad is 80, and he's actually, he suffers from some memory loss.
Okay.
And it's not solely he doesn't remember things. So sometimes things pop up. I've joked with him and said, Mom didn't go to school in 1957. There's no record of it. But he didn't really, nothing in his face registered as, oh my God, he knows. None of that. But what I like doing is taking that question back again and again to see,
Well, you've never asked him directly, right? You've never asked him directly?
Not directly. I just told him that he didn't go to school in 1957. Right.
Do you think if you asked him directly?
There's a possibility.
Is there a reason
He's been
why
fairly
you're
open
not?
with me.
Is there a reason why
it didn't occur to me because he wasn't around.
Okay.
My thought was that he wasn't there, so he wasn't in Toledo at that time, and that even though he married her 4 years later, it didn't occur to me that he would know anything about it. Yeah.
That's
interesting. But thank you for that. Yeah. That didn't even occur to me. So I'm
because I don't know. I mean, with my dad as well, if I don't ask him something directly, he doesn't tell me, even if I sort of hint at it. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is, but I have to be direct, and then when he tells me finally something, I'm kind of frustrated with the situation. He's like, well, you didn't ask me. I'm like, but you knew I wanted to know. And you'll be like, and so I don't know. Sometimes if it's not a painful ask, it might be better to just directly ask to see if it jogs his memory.
I think that's a really good question because yeah, my brain just went, oh, he wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
there. And I immediately went to her family members, right? The remaining family members. There were 7 siblings. Her parents have long been deceased,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
died in 66 and 67. And her siblings, there are only 3 left, and they're the youngest siblings. And so I asked her, the sister, if she knew anything. She said no.
Okay.
So, but thanks for that. I'm going to ask my dad just straight up and said, do you remember this? Do you know anything about this?
And did your mom leave any journals or letters or anything like that?
No, nothing like that. No,
Okay.
the majority of the stuff I have related to my mom are photographs, the interview that I did with her, and things like resumes, and of course her funeral program, those kinds of things. So it's not a lot of primary resources related to my mom. And every time I find something or someone finds something, they gratefully they give it to me and it becomes
That's
a part of my
nice.
archive.
Yeah, that's nice.
Very much so.
And I'm guessing that you've documented too, just thinking about your memories with your mom.
Oh, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
so I think the night that my mother passed away, I was actually living in Atlanta at the time, and I was attending graduate school at Clark Atlanta University. And I had a feeling my mother was sick, but I did not know the severity of her sickness. So when she was admitted and she was in hospice, I still couldn't like process it, I guess, because maybe I didn't want to think that my mother was on the verge of passing away.
Mm.
And so when my dad called, actually, no, my sister called earlier that day and said, Mom is in hospice. She's not doing very well. And I was like, oh, okay. And I called maybe 5 minutes after she passed. And my father said, well, how did you know? How did you know? And I was like, I didn't know. I just had a feeling. And immediately after the phone call, I'm crying and everything, but I go over to my desk and I just write her a letter. And from there on out, I wrote, and this was 1997, January 1997. It was actually a day before my 31st birthday.
I'm sorry.
She
What
died
was the What was the date?
January 14th, 1997.
97. Okay.
And some of the public records actually say she died on my birthday, but I was like, no, she actually died a day before. Um,
Oh my
but from
goodness.
then, yeah, but from then on, I have written about her in poems. I've written short stories about her, memories, some pictures. I've taken pictures of her that evoke certain kinds of memories, but I luxuriate in my mother's memory. She's one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
She taught me how to fly. She was that person who would say, go ahead and try it. She was, be careful, but she never discouraged me. And she was, I like listening to my mother. My mother told me a lot of stories when I was a kid. One of my favorite stories is she would tell us she loved cats. So she would say, oh, we had cats. We had a black cat. It was called Blackie. We had a brown cat called
Mm-hmm.
Brownie. We had an orange cat called, I was like, let me guess, Orangey. I was like, oh, seems like it's kind of basic, Mom. you know, and she
Mm.
got along with most everybody. And I noticed that um, there was a store near us, a Kroger's, one of the Kroger's, a grocery store. My mother would park in the parking lot, and she had 5 kids. So she'd take 1 or 2 of us into the store and leave the rest of us roasting in a hot car in the parking lot. I would see my mother get to the front of the store, be stopped by somebody, and would be talking. Of course, like, a minute is like 1,000 years for a kid in a burning hot car. You're like, oh, Mom, just come out, please. And then she get a little further into the store and we see her stopped again. And, I'm Elaine's boy. That's her name. And when I go back to Toledo, I'm Elaine's boy. Aren't you Elaine's boy? And I like being Elaine's boy. I like that woman. I
Mm-hmm.
liked having the opportunity to share some earth time with her. Um, and sometimes I dream about her, so I feel very fortunate that the last words I said to my mom before she passed were, we will always have a connection. And at that time, it occurred to me that part of me knew she was passing, maybe, but I didn't know. I didn't know consciously. But looking back on it, I think about how that phrase resonates with me today, and how, like I said, just how fortunate I am to have known a loving mother. You
Right.
know.
Did you also share with your mother that you were gay?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was very fortunate that I love saying fortunate, I guess. My mom was pretty open, and this is how it happened. So I came out like most people do in iterations. And so I came out first to some friends and then to my siblings. And then one day I'm in the car with my mom and I said, Mom, I need to tell you something and I hope you don't freak out. And she's like, okay. And I told her I'm gay. And she goes, okay, well, I still love you. And I drove off with her in the car and we just drove off and
Mm,
continued our day. It was very, very, very quick and very, I
painless.
guess, very painless. And also, I expected more, not necessarily drama, but just more questions and none of that. She's like, oh, okay, well, I love you. And that was it.
Huh.
You know how people say they know before they know, but they're waiting for the kid to tell them?
You're
I think
right.
it was one of those things. I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love that you told your mother that you will always have a connection, and I feel like you continuing to try to understand her,
Oh,
even
yeah.
20 years after she's been gone, speaks
Yeah.
volumes to that.
Her
Her
presence is
presence.
felt.
Well, Stephen, I really appreciate you sharing your story about your mom.
Yours too. Thank you. Thank you.
And she does seem like she was a pretty remarkable woman.
Yeah.
Um, and I know I've seen her picture and I've seen likenesses of her. And so I have thought about her a lot as well throughout the years through knowing you.
Hmm.
I'm definitely excited to continue to explore more about your past and about the things you're thinking of, and very much looking forward to talking with our guests about what their experiences have been like. I have a feeling that everybody is going to be bringing something pretty amazing to the
I
conversation.
agree. I completely agree. And with that, I mean, that's it for our first week, our first episode of In the Telling. I want to thank you guys for listening, and we hope that you'll join us again in 2 weeks. You can find In the Telling wherever you get your podcast. And so, on behalf of Miranda and I, take care and have a good day.